I'm delighted to welcome former Waterford hurler Noel Connors to the show. Noel, how are you getting on?
Morning, gents. How's it going?
Very well. This should be a pretty exciting day tomorrow. Let's start there. It is, of course, Clare against Kilkenny. It's a game that, well, apparently everybody can call according to our quick picks there. Everybody's going for Clare, but it's only a 1 point spread according to the bookies. It feels like a coin toss, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's. I suppose firstly, it's great to be talking about semi-finals. It's kind of strange that it's the 1st of July and we're already talking about it, but it's strange, but a good thing. But that's a different debate. I suppose on form, you're probably looking at Clare through the Munster Championship. But I suppose you go back to tradition and just kind of listen to some of the previous speakers on it. You're listening to like the traditional Kilkenny. I don't think Clare have actually beaten Kilkenny in a championship match at all. I think they've met like 5 times. And they actually haven't had a chance to beat him in championship. So when it comes to that, even psychologically, that's a huge factor.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess the other aspect of all of this is that, like, when we talk about these intangibles, about teams getting up for an occasion or getting the very most out of themselves, just Kilkenny have this insane ability to just do that. Like, it's very hard to put your finger on why they do that, because Brian Lohan is as passionate a hurling man as Brian Cody. I'm sure he is, and I'm sure his team talks are as good and all that sort of stuff. And there's been plenty of other managers that you can point towards, but Cody just has this incredible ability to pull out a result when you potentially least expect it.
Yeah, and ironically enough, I was actually listening to I think it was actually someone that was talking about the All Blacks there during the week. Obviously the rugby tour is down in New Zealand the next couple of weeks, and they had a really interesting kind of understand, I suppose, how the All Blacks play, and it kind of relates very similar to how Limerick and Kilkenny are playing, and particularly Kilkenny over the last number of years. What they try and do is they try and wear you down, and once they wear you down, then they start hurling. And I think that's kind of how Kilkenny go about it, be it at club level but also at intercounty level. You've seen it for many, many years where after about like maybe 55, 60 minutes, both teams are kind of neck and neck, and all of a sudden then the other team just kind of fades away, and then Kilkenny start hurling. And I think that's kind of the philosophy that nearly Clare are kind of going at as well. But over the last couple of years, it's very much, run teams into the ground, hit them as hard as you can with your body, and physically you try and drain them, and then you try and hurl as best as you can.
On the Cody situation, Noel, if Kilkenny did, everyone's tipping Clare here, but like we're expecting to be close. If Clare won by 5 or 6 points, where is the narrative re Cody going forward?
Yeah, I suppose like even the last 2 and 3 years, people have kind of nearly argued that is it time for Cody to go on. Arguably, he's probably the best and most successful inter-county manager. And I think sport, as we've probably mentioned on many occasions, is a very fickle thing, and people forget quite quickly how successful he has been with Kilkenny. He's won more All-Irelands than most inter-county teams have ever seen in their life. Every year, like you always say, Kilkenny, since that great team has finished, that Kilkenny are in transition. But ironically enough, they seem to be in semi-finals ever since. They haven't won the last 2, but I'd imagine that Cody is very keen to kind of right that wrong and win the 3rd one out of the last 3 years.
Noel, we wanted to get your take on a couple of the key individual matchups across both of these games. So we'll start with that Clare versus Kilkenny match. And one of the first things we want to talk about here is who's going to pick up TJ Reid.
Yeah, and you know what? You actually just mentioned there that I suppose Brian Lohan is very similar to Brian Cody in many ways. And I suppose we're very used to Kilkenny not kind of changing their shape and not changing personnel to kind of suit other persons on the opposition. But I think that they could put Dave McInerney full back. If TJ's in full forward, I think they might put him in full back just to kind of see how it goes. Dave McInerney is, I suppose, very comfortable in full back, and he's marked TJ on many different occasions. It's not to say that Conor Cleary is not capable of marking him, but I think it would settle a lot of the team because Davy Mack has been on him for many different years and has done quite well on TJ. That, I suppose, leaves the question then who goes to wing back. But I think that's a big thing. TJ probably hasn't been, I suppose, the TJ that we've seen over the last number of years. But in saying that, once it comes to semi-finals and finals, there's no better man to kind of put his shoulder to the wheel and really, kick into gear. So I think that's a really big battle.
What maybe plays into Clare's favour here is that they've been through this. They've been through Leach in at the edge of the square. They sort of notice it's coming. Like, does that kill the element of surprise if they have this plan hatched that if TJ goes into full forward, David Mack is back there, because we know that we didn't do that in the last game and we got caught a little bit. So, like, is it actually advantage Clare in that regard if TJ goes in full forward?
It is in many ways, but again, like every championship match is different. TJ is certainly a lot more. He's a lot more developed in the air. He's left over right. He's a lot more awkward, but physically he's a lot more developed as well. Like TJ is probably the best person I'd say in the country in the air at fielding the ball. So irrespective of who you put on him, it's definitely going to be a challenge. TJ is a phenomenal player, and he's a great player to bring people into the game. So, you know, again, I think you mentioned it just a second ago, goals win games, and there's no better team than Kilkenny than going for the early juggler like we've seen it over the last decade or even two. Once they get a sniff of goal, they're going to go for it, and I imagine that's the thing they're going to try and do, particularly early on, just to kind of test to see where the Clare full backline are at.
Okay, so the other two forwards that we're chatting about here, so we'll have a look at Peter Duggan, we'll have a look at Owen Cody. What's going to be done on both of those?
It's strange because you know, Peter Duggan is a complete different animal than what we've seen Clare have. Like Clare traditionally go for maybe small, low-sized, very fast and pacey hurlers in the full forward line, and this is a completely different dynamic. So he brings a complete different dimension to the Clare team, so they can obviously hit the ball into the corners where I would say someone like David Reid is in the corner, he can hit it in quite low. But then you have obviously Peter Duggan as a kind of target man to hit in full forward. Obviously the obvious person there is Hugh Lawler. To mark him, he has been very impressive. He probably doesn't get the recognition he deserves. Full back, I must say, is an awful position to be in, because if you make one mistake, it's a goal. So you might play a super like 70 minutes, and all of a sudden with the last two pucks of the ball, it might go in and it might get 2 goals. So that's the challenge of being in the full back line. But I think that it's very, very important that Hugh Lawler, I suppose, stamps his authority there physically over the last couple of games. He's been very, very impressive. And it's so important that they can put a handle on Peter Duggan, because if you look at the last number of games, even against the likes of Limerick, who everyone is well aware that Limerick are a phenomenal team physically and in terms of hurling, but he caused them some troubles. He was phenomenal against Waterford. Waterford couldn't get to grips with him at all, and he caused chaos in there. So I think that's very important that Hugh Lawler wins the first couple of balls and gets on top.
Right. So then Owen Cody, who are you putting on him if you're Brian Lohan?
Yeah, ironically enough, again, I suppose you're looking at someone like a Rory Hayes, and I know he was taken off early last time, and that might come down to, again, like, you know, it's very, very difficult. There was so much talk about, you know, him being sent off or whatever, or should have been sent off, and then obviously been cited after the match and so on. And then, you know, it's very, very difficult for him to try and, you know, get himself up for a match and only having a few days to do so and then get taken off. But I do think Rory Hayes will be, you know, an ideal personality. The reason I would say that is because he's fast and he's very aggressive. Owen Cody is kind of resembles a younger version of an Eddie Brennan, where he gets the ball and he just goes directly at goal. So I think you need someone that's very tight marking, but also someone that can get back around him. So if he does get past, that he has the pace to get back around him. So I think Rory Hayes has probably been one of the best players for Clare over the last couple of years. In terms of performance, he's always been, as you were talking about there about rating players, I think he's been always at 7, maybe 8 or even 9.
Noel, sorry to interrupt. Just to put this to you, Joe Canning's actually focused on Hayes in the Irish Times this morning. I just love to get your take on this. He says he's a reputation for being Clare's most outstanding corner back, but if you look at the matchups he's had in this championship, I don't know if that really stands up. Desi Hutchinson scored 1-6 of the round robin game at Waterford. Shemi Flanagan took him for 8 points in the Munster final. Lee Chin scored 1 and set up another before Hayes was subbed off after 8 minutes the last day. There's a big distance between perception and reality, and Lohan can only afford to deal in reality. Is that a harsh assessment of Hayes?
Yeah, I think it is. Like the other side of it too is, you know, like where did the balls come from? If the ball is getting hit in, like, and there's 50-60 yards of room, you know, it's very, very difficult. You know, you go back to, let's say, the Desi Hutchinson one, for instance, like the ball was probably handed in across. From what I can remember, the ball was handed across. Desi was left on his own. Again, Rory Hayes went to engage the person that was running in and hoping that the wing back was going to come across. And that was very similar to other games. As someone that's in the full back line that has been there for many years, it's next to impossible in regards to who you're marking. If there's that room inside to try and mark it, it's next to impossible. But when you look at it, I suppose, at face value, when I suppose it's a 50-50 ball, there's probably no better person to come out with the ball. Like, you know, you look at even the championship match against Waterford this year, he was phenomenal. And you go back through even the previous matches, I think he's been an excellent hurler. So I think that's a very harsh assessment. And also, like, just because Lee Chin might have scored like a couple of points, it doesn't necessarily mean that Rory Hayes was on him for that period of time. He might have been marking him, but there might have been a switch in play, for instance.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to remember, did you mark Conor Whelan in the final in 2017?
Yes, I did.
Seem to recall you did all right, actually.
Yeah, from what I can remember, I did pretty okay. Pretty okay. I'm blushing here now, so you shouldn't say too much.
What do you do with him? Like he's obviously, geez, he's 5 years older now. I remember Anthony Cunningham giving him his debut when he was a minor. I think he was certainly 18, and he already looked like a tank. Now you were physically, obviously, I mean, one of the most imposing cornerbacks of your generation. But what do you do with Conor Whelan?
Like, you know what? It's the good thing about, I suppose, going to places like college, for instance. We had Owen Murphy, Scruff was on goal for Kilkenny now, and I was always intrigued to try and get a handle on, we'll say, Kilkenny backs at the time. So you had like some of the best backs in the country with JJ and all of those, and Jackie Turner. And I kind of asked him a question once upon a time, you know, like how do they approach it? And he said, like, the most important thing is get the ball to ground and you'll win the ball. And I kind of always took that kind of mentality, is don't allow him to win the first ball. And I suppose the challenging thing now at times is that a lot of inter-county players, not just backs, but as forwards, they want to actually play hurling. There's a time to play hurling and there's a time not to play hurling. There's a time to physically, we'll say, try and wrestle the person. Now, I don't mean obviously jump on their back, but physically, like, push them out of the way, be it with your shoulder or with your back or with your arm, and leave a break through. Whereas, I suppose, in the last 5 and 6 years, it's gone beyond that, where every cornerback wants to be someone like a Sean Finn that's getting on maybe, you know, 10, 20 possessions, or similar enough, you look at someone like a Barry Nash, he's very similar. But there's a time to do that and there's a time not to do it. And you have to realise that you're marking somebody that's the best player in their county in that particular position. So what I would try and advise people, particularly in the full back line, is it's just to break the ball. You don't have to catch every ball. You don't have to win every ball. You have a keeper behind you. If you can break it in behind him, he is the field and the field is open.
And you think Mike Casey's going to be on him this weekend?
I think Mikey Hasty will be on him, but then it doesn't surprise me if Sean Finn goes on him. I don't think Barry Nash, because Barry is probably a bit more of a hurler, and I don't think that will suit him. Now, don't get me wrong, I was kind of a bit intrigued when he went back there. Initially, he was like a wing forward or a corner forward, and he was a fabulous player. And then when I saw him going to full back line number, I kind of was a bit concerned, but he's been a revelation back there. He's a joy to watch because he just could do anything.
On two of the Limerick danger men then, you picked out Aaron Glennon and Gearóid Hegarty. Who do you think is going to be, or who would you put on them if you were the Galway manager?
Yeah, I think you have to look at Dahi Burke has probably been the best fullback in the country over the last 10 years. What is he, 4 or 5 All-Stars at fullback? So I think that he has to mark him. And, you know, everyone is familiar with the fact that, like, Glenn needs one chance and he'll bang a goal. And he's incredibly difficult to mark because he knows where the ball is going before the ball is even hit there. It's like as if they say, right, when if Tom Morrissey has it in the half-forward line, he knows exactly where he's going to hit the ball. If Dan Morrissey has it in the half-back line, he knows exactly where he's going to hit it. So as a back, it's next to impossible to try and mark that. You're nearly firefighting at times. But Glenn is just, he's a joy to watch, but a nightmare to mark because he can get it high, low, or indifferent, and he's lethal.
Do you find that, just to mention some of those, like Joe obviously now, Owen is quoting him from the Irish Times, so he's left the scene. Do you find some of those marquee Galway players like McInerney, Burke, David Burke as well, just aren't necessarily at the pitch they were at? Noel, do you think, or is that being harsh?
I think it's probably a bit harsh. You know, you look at someone like David Burke, particularly in midfield, he's probably been one of the best midfielders in the country, again, over the last 10 years. But I suppose he hasn't really got to as many games as probably where he wanted to. He seemed to be carrying a couple of different knocks. And, like, you know, it's very, very difficult. David is probably now 31 or 32 at this stage. And it takes a small bit longer for you to recover. But, like, there's no player like him, I don't think, in Galway that physically can get up and down the field as much as he can. Now, he won't last the 70 minutes, but he'll put in a 40 or 50-minute shift that no other Galway person can do. And I think that his experience is invaluable because Croke Park is a very different place than playing in somewhere like a Thurles or playing in somewhere like a Parnell Park or a Nolan Park. And you've obviously heard before, many different games are won before people run out of the tunnel. You know, they hear the sound, they hear the noise, and when they run out into the tunnel, they kind of get a bit of a fright.
Well, how would you exonerate the Galway defence, would say, against Cork then? Because, like, the running game, the first half, like, I mean, if there were an XG in hurling, like, Galway were absolutely blessed to win that game, and they were opened up time and time again.
Yeah, and I totally agree, but we have to remember, like, that Cork team aren't as bad as people are kind of articulating. You know, they were in an Ireland final last year. They've won it was 3 or 4 in a row under 20 All-Ireland, you know, under 20 last year, whatever it may be as well. They got bet this year. and they've been very, very successful at colleges level and at schools level. Like, they have a very, very good team, and people kind of forget that. Cork were probably very hard done by not to win that game. Again, everyone will talk about not bringing in Cadigan or not starting Hoggy and all these different things, but they are not a bad team. And, you know, it's easy to say that, oh, Galway weren't particularly good today. It wasn't the fact that Galway weren't particularly good, it was the fact that Cork were very good. You look at, from, we'll say, the Waterford game in Welsh Park, since then, we've seen a very, very different Cork team.
Noel, who's going to be in the All-Ireland final this year?
Everyone is saying that Clare is. I'm actually thinking that Kilkenny will win that. And I don't think it's very... I think that most people are happy to go with Limerick, and I agree. Ironically enough, I was just looking at some of the stats on it. Clare actually have the highest scoring average. I think they've like 40 scores over the last 3 games. I think the last 3 games are probably a better reflection of where teams are at. I think Clare have, like, on average 40 scores. You look at Kilkenny, they have 25.6. You look at the Galway team, they're 23, which is the lowest. And then you look at Limerick, who 32. So if you're going off that, I would say Limerick, and then I think Kilkenny, because I don't think Clare have beaten them in the championship to date. So I think that's a huge omen.
All right, very good. Noel Connors, great stuff. Thanks a million for being with us.